Welcome to the November episode of International Voices. I am your host and moderator, Udo Fluck, and I have the great pleasure to oversee the Office of Global and Cultural Affairs in Arts Missoula. To listen to previous episodes, please visit artsmissoula.org, click on Global and Cultural Affairs, and visit Radio and Podcasts. International Voices is a monthly podcast brought to you by Global and Cultural Affairs of Arts Missoula and The Trail 1033. My guest this month is Miss Tammy Sandhu, the British Deputy Consul General of the British Consulate in San Francisco. She joined the Consulate early this year from the UK. As Deputy Consul General, she co-leads the Consulate General in San Francisco of more than 30 people covering UK-US relations across the Pacific Northwest, which includes Northern California, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Wyoming, Alaska, and Montana. The Consulate General in San Francisco and the UK Government Office in Seattle cover a broad range of political and policy work, including climate, trade, tech, as well as providing support to British nationals and British companies in the Pacific Northwest. Before moving to San Francisco, Tammy worked in international human resources. She was the head of secondments and the head of international HR strategy and EU exit for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Tammy also worked on the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's COVID response. She was born in Leicester in the United Kingdom, completed a bachelor's with honors in English literature at the University of Warwick, and was awarded a Master of Science degree in International Public Policy from the University College London. She joined the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in 2005. Ms. Sandhu is a member of the Order of the British Empire. In 2020, she was elected chair of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic Committee, and later served as co-chair of the merged Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office's Race and Ethnicity Network. She continues to work on racial equality both within the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office and through her work in San Francisco. She has also completed diplomatic postings in Morocco, Brussels, Iraq, Kenya, and India. It is a pleasure to have her as a guest on this November episode of International Voices. What is the British government's mission in the US and in Montana in particular?
Udo, thanks. Thank you for the question. Let me take the two parts of that question in turn. So the British government's mission in the US, like any bilateral relationship, so the relationship between one country or another, is here to do a range of things. You hear a lot about the special relationship between the UK and the US, and that is very much what we are here to cultivate and to deepen, and that is through various things. That is on the economy, I would say, so building both economies mutually. That is on people in particular. So, one of our biggest pre-COVID, and hopefully now with the travel corridor reopening, people-to-people links and tourism is a massive part of that. But also, we are here predominantly to work together on some of the world's biggest challenges. So I think it won't be any surprise to your listeners that some of the biggest challenges that we face right now, whether that is COVID, whether that is climate change, in particular, those are the two things I think that are very much on people's minds at the moment. Those are things that nation states cannot do alone. and the US and the UK are a fundamental, I think, part in setting the standard across the globe and setting the level of ambition across the globe on lots of these issues. So I would say that certainly forms the majority of what we do, but there are obviously other elements, the cultural links, which we'll hopefully come on to, particularly given Arts Missoula's focus. But in Montana in particular, maybe I'll talk a little bit about that. So I am based in the Consulate in San Francisco, and it might seem strange that I'm talking to you from San Francisco talking about Montana, but we cover from here the whole of the Pacific Northwest, Montana included, and we're here really to work on a range of issues and to really have a close partnership across a range of issues. So COVID recovery is really one of the main parts. So how we build our economies back after the pandemic. And I know that Montana has its comeback plan. So similar to that. So how do we work together to mutually recover our economies, but also a whole range of other shared interests, including on agriculture, how we support small businesses, the food and drink sector, the tech sector. I know that Montana is particularly proud of, rightly proud of, its beef, and so the trade in agriculture is particularly important. But one of the other things which I mentioned in relation to the UK and the US, but I think the UK, Brits in Montana in particular, of course, is tourism. So thinking about Yellowstone and the Glacier National Park, we get a lot of traffic, and so making sure that Brits come here, but also really engage with Montana when they are here is all part of what we're here to do.
And just to elaborate on that a little bit, the region, the Pacific Northwest region, includes Montana, but also Wyoming, Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Northern California, and Alaska. Is that correct?
Correct.
Great. Thank you. I would like to move a little bit towards a bigger issue and then come back to Montana in a little while. The past 3 podcasts focused on cultures and the environment, and some of our focus today connects well to that topic, and gives us a chance to continue to think about this. Contemporary climate change includes both global warming caused by humans and its impact on Earth's weather patterns. There have been previous periods of climate change, but the current change and changes are more rapid than any known events in Earth's history. Climate change has been called the defining challenge of our time. The United Nations Climate Conference, the 26th session of the Conference of the Parties, started officially yesterday and will continue through November 12th in Glasgow. Can you tell me a little bit more about the conference and the UK's involvement?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's very serendipitous that we're having this conversation this week in particular, when global leaders are coming together to really deliver for the biggest kind of global challenge of our time. There's really no other way of putting it. So to give a bit of context first, so in 2015, global leaders met in Paris. So they agreed what was called the Paris Agreement, where they agreed to limit global warming to under 2 degrees, actually to under 1.5 degrees. And so this conference in Glasgow is to make sure, or to try and set a high level of ambition across the globe to ensure we limit global warming under that temperature. I think you're absolutely right. Climate action is urgent. I don't think anybody can deny that. And really, this conference is about coming together to solve really one of the world's biggest problems. It's a massive effort of global diplomacy that's happening this week. And we have to deliver at Glasgow. I think, you know, we all want the same thing. I think every single nation state coming to Glasgow wants the same thing. We want a greener, bluer planet, in simple terms. And all countries, really, what we are looking for in Glasgow is for all countries to accelerate the way in which they build a greener planet, the way in which they grow their economy in a way that works and benefits everybody, whether you're a developed economy or a developing economy alike. We're looking for a transition that's fair, that's inclusive, and that, you know, builds green growth and high quality jobs. So that's the kind of the scale of ambition. I'll talk a little bit about the specific elements in there that we're really looking to see commitments on. So they are in 4 areas: coal, cars, cash, and trees. And so let me go into those very, very briefly. So
Sure.
On coal, we're looking for the global economy to really simply stop using coal. So we're looking for the developed world to give up coal by 2030, and for the developing world to give that up by 2040. On cars, we're looking for, as we have in the UK, for people to set a time limit on when they are going to ban the use of fossil fuel internal combustion engines. And move particularly towards electric vehicles. On cash, we're looking for the richest nations in the world who have produced most of the world's carbon historically,
Right.
looking for them to really support the rest of the planet with funds. So we're looking for ambitious targets of funds for up to $100 billion a year going towards that. And then on trees, well, trees is more than trees, but for the planet, really, by 2030, to be planting more trees, because we know that nature-based solutions are really the key to kind of carbon emissions. So using our natural defences, you know, stopping the massacre, frankly, of forests that's happening globally. So that's where we're setting the level of ambition for Glasgow.
And thank you, Tammy, for addressing those individual areas. And perhaps we can go back to those that have this individual focus in a little while. But I would like to pick up on a word that you used, and that was acceleration, and the need for this to happen. And obviously, there have been 25 previous sessions of the Conference of the Parties, and I'm sure at each one of them there was the desire to make change, to cause change. But when I was listening to the opening statements, one particularly by Sir David Attenborough, who gave a very moving speech about the importance of what we need to do and the fact that it needs to be done in an accelerated fashion. And then His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, who was also one of the speakers, and he said to act with all dispatch and decisively, because time has quite literally run out. So the urgency here seems to be much more critical than it was probably 10 or 15 years ago. Can you tell us a little bit more about what does it mean for the UK to lead on such a global issue?
Yeah, of course. And I think, yes, pinpointing those words of urgency and acceleration is absolutely key. because what we really need here is for people to deliver on their legal mandates, and for us to get a negotiated outcome that delivers those for individual countries. But look, I think your question about the UK leading. So I think the thing here is that the UK is leading by example, which makes it particularly pertinent,
Yes.
for us to hold the presidency.
Yes.
And I think by doing that, we've shown that it's possible. We've shown that it's possible to transition your economy. Just in the last 30 years alone, the UK has reduced its carbon emissions by 44%. I think they're down by 44% as of today, while our economy has grown by 78%. So we've demonstrated that this is possible.
Right.
And I think, since we've taken on the presidency, the amount of the global economy that's covered now by net zero commitments has increased from 30% to 80%. So I think, for us to be holding the presidency is both to drive that ambition across the global economy, but also to show ourselves
that it can be done.
To lead by exactly that.
Right. And I think you're absolutely right. It makes a lot more sense to speak from the background of we have done it and it can be done than to have a nation that hasn't done it speak in this as in future terms. It's much more believable. And I think it is a greater call to action if it comes from somebody or a government that basically says, we're not asking for the impossible because we have done it. And so just follow the lead here and we can all do it. That makes a lot of sense. And while governments, of course, are extremely important in starting that change and having some kind of a leading role for its citizens, these clearly monumental changes and actions that are required to avert the consequences of climate change are with the governments, but is there a role for smaller communities and governments to play together?
Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind that local solutions are really, and individual solutions are what is key. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to mobilize every individual to change their behavior on climate action.
Right.
So absolutely, yes. And I think, and this is a key feature of the negotiations, and certainly the build up to the negotiations I think there are various ways in which you can approach that. So whether that's companies thinking about how they become carbon neutral themselves, and that can be anything from a small organization, how you procure your products from sustainable carbon neutral suppliers, up to big companies with big fleets who go completely electric through their supply chains. There is definitely, there's something that everybody can do on a very kind of local scale. There's something about how you protect your surroundings. I think that's become increasingly important, and people have become increasingly aware of that. And I think particularly thinking about the impact of local communities and particularly disadvantaged communities or indigenous communities, as you pointed out, thinking about how they are part of the solution, but also part of the conversation, and you find solutions that protect those who are most impacted by climate. That for me is something very much that is a local level solution. Making sure that there is an inclusive dialogue and that everybody has a voice in in this. And I think, and what, you know, one of the things I'll point, or a couple of things I'll point out. So we, as part of these negotiations, we started what was called the Race to Zero, which was really an initiative that people could sign up to, where they are both supported through their ambition to become carbon neutral. And we have a range of everything from state governments to local businesses, to universities across the US who have signed up to that. But the other one, the other initiative I'll point out, which shows what you can do at a local level, is something called the C40 initiative, which is really city to city. So there are 40 cities around the world who have all committed to moving their local economies to become carbon neutral, and are working to support each other and share their best practice as they all kind of try and achieve the same thing.
Right. This is a perfect segue, Tammy, to my next question on how will plans for climate action impact indigenous communities, which is of particular concern in Montana with our native tribes.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and something that we've been very kind of mindful of, particularly here, and then particularly in this part of the US, and where we've been hosting dialogues around this, bringing indigenous communities into the conversation to both understand the impact on their that climate is having on them, but also then to work with them, because it's often the indigenous communities that have these very what we refer to as nature-based solutions that can help more globally. So I think any mitigation strategies that prioritize environmental justice are key to this, and are a particular priority for us here.
And it seems as though, as you said, that indigenous communities around the world have long time ago foreseen what has happened and the situation that we are somewhat stuck in right now. And it seems as though many of these indigenous communities, because of their connection to nature, have already begun restoring perhaps even some of the nature that has been harmed by doing things differently, and by being more aware and conscious about the environment, probably, if one can say that. So it seems as though there's a greater awareness in indigenous communities than there has been in non-indigenous communities.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think everything you said is absolutely right, and I think the big difference here, and maybe this also speaks to a broader agenda actually around kind of diversity and using platforms to give underrepresented communities and voices, and voices a platform.
Right.
And I think this is a key step change. We've done this in previous COPs, we're doing it now, but we're also on a very local level, I think. I think we've all become much more aware that, as certainly as national governments, but also in other environments, that we can use our platform and our privilege to help raise those voices, raise awareness of what other people are doing, A, how they are impacted, but B, the solutions that they have. And I think that has been key to making sure that they are part of the conversation, or the indigenous communities are now part of the conversation. So yeah, I completely agree with you that they have both voice and visibility in a way that maybe wasn't there before.
From your perspective, Tammy, how can those diversity values translate into real change? What have you seen, or where do you see potential for this to happen?
What we've done is we've been, in the run-up to these negotiations is spoken to states, spoken to local leaders, spoken to tribal leaders to ensure that diverse communities are there and their solutions are there and their issues are there. And that is anything from, whether that's infrastructure planning or energy transition and the impact that can potentially have, whether that's about jobs and growth and skills. The way in which you go about doing those things can really make a real difference to the success of the investments that companies and states, local government make when you are creating solutions to particular problems, whether they are about how you invest in transport or how you transition an economy. Having those communities, those indigenous communities, as part of the conversation from the very beginning, not as an afterthought at the end, but from the beginning. So you are co-creating the solution,
right.
And they are very much a part of that, can make the difference between whether or not your initiative is successful.
Right.
So it's not just something that you think of as an add-on, but that it is,
part of the process.
Crucial to exactly. It is integral to the process that you go about when you're doing policy making, or
right.
Whether that's in government or in business or wherever else.
Right, and probably this is what wasn't done in the past. Now that we're looking at where we could have fixed things, it seems as though perhaps those were some issues that prevented perhaps an acceleration at a much earlier stage, was because those members were more thought of as add-ons to an existing group than as an equal member, and as members that should have been involved in the solution finding process from the beginning on. I totally agree with you. Probably that was something that we could have, if we could go back in time, probably something that should be fixed, and that might have accelerated the solution finding process.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is we are there is no doubt that we focus on countries and what countries can do. We focus on a very macro picture.
Right.
And actually, one of the things that I think is different now is that we're focused on what we call in the UN kind of toolkit in our Sustainable Development Goals, we call micro actions. So we've become much more aware of the fact that some of the micro actions, the smaller solutions, the local solutions, can really have the biggest impact. But I've seen across this region of the Pacific Northwest already the impact that climate is having on, so for example, I was in it's gone completely out of my head. I was in Yosemite last week, and just seeing the impact of both wildfires and then flash floods and landslides, and the impact that has on nature. It is right here on people's doorsteps in this part of the world. So I think it's really worth investing our time and resources into preserving nature, and to find ways of creating jobs that work with nature. And of course, in Montana, that's I'm sure very much kind of top of mind when you think about Glacier National Park and Yellowstone, for example, and thinking about even thinking about when travel resumes, kind of more particularly international travel, and finding ways to make sure that tourism to those places is done in a more sustainable way.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there, especially in this region in Montana and with Glacier Park in our neighborhood, there have been studies done over the last 30 years with photographs taken of glaciers and how they have diminished over time, and the sad prediction that Glacier Park in the very near future will actually have no glaciers anymore, and will be a mountainous region, but no glaciers. So that the name even wouldn't fit anymore, or would be a reminder of opportunities lost because it doesn't fit anymore. And just when you think about this, for generations, Glacier Park was Glacier Park, and there were glaciers to look at, and how that can change, and so rapidly change, or the wildfires that we have battled in Montana, and that have gotten increasingly worse over the years, similar to what you've seen in California and in other places. I mean, there are warning signals all over the place that that really, I think, are sort of, it's a few minutes before we need to do something. We don't have the luxury of time and of taking it easy and looking at things in sort of a longer planning stage, but something needs to be done right away. Now, when we were talking about engaging with the indigenous populations, not only in Montana, but around the world, on what we can learn and what they have done already to fight climate change in their own communities, is cultural engagement important for policy?
Absolutely. So I talked a little bit at the beginning about how we are here also for our kind of people-to-people and cultural links.
Right.
And I think we're great believers in the fact that those people-to-people and cultural links can really help with the policy issues. And actually, one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, which I absolutely should, particularly when we were talking about marginalized communities, of course, is the impact on youth. I think that's another thing that that's been a very much, particularly on climate, about people-to-people solutions and young people coming together, because the impact on our future generations is going to be, it's going to hit them hardest, but also they are really the key to finding the new solutions and making choices now at a young age about how we kind of protect our future. So as part of just talking about culture, there's a youth culture part to the climate agenda, which was, I think, very, really important to mention here. But on kind of the importance of cultural exchange more broadly, again, on climate. So actually this week we are hosting here in San Francisco an event to bring together really kind of leaders in the climate world. And we have a choice about how we do those things as government. And what we are doing is we are hosting a climate music event. So we are bringing the arts and culture to this program as a slightly different way of engaging people on something that is hugely important and top of the kind of UK-US agenda. But instead we are using the medium of music to do that as a slightly different way of engaging. And actually, when I was talking about engaging youth, we did something a couple of weeks ago where we brought a kind of group of young people from a local school in to play a board game. And it was a kind of a simulation of what might happen to the world should you make certain choices. So and so it was a different way using arts and culture to engage people in the issue, but B, into kind of into the future solutions of an issue. So I would say it's hugely important. And we've done this across climate, but we do it on other issues as well. So whether it's whether it's screening a premiere of the new Bond movie to kind of talk about links in the film industry more broadly and to promote that economy. Whether it's, so for example, we recently did something around a British produced film called Everybody's Talking About Jamie, but it's a film about a young boy dealing with his sexuality while he grows up in the UK. But we use that as a way to talk about issues in the LGBT plus community. So there's just a few examples of how important it is to center arts and culture into some of our policy solutions.
And as a program in Arts Missoula, Tammy, I couldn't agree more with you on the importance of this, because that really is what we believe as well, is that we can use the connection between arts and cultures and really engage people.
You know, and I think one of the best things about using arts and culture is it's the, you know, you can be trying to find the solution to a really big thorny problem, but bringing people together around arts and culture makes you realize how much you kind of have shared interests, shared values, and it really kind of fosters that and helps to break down
Right.
some of the different viewpoints that you might be coming at something from. So it's hugely important.
And I don't know, maybe you agree, but I sometimes, when I think back, I'm in my mid-50s now, and I'm thinking back when I was 20 or 30, I wanted to be engaged through a certain language. And I know when you get older, you don't necessarily speak that language anymore. And so I think having a message that is created by people that are not belonging to the youth group themselves can make this more difficult. So making sure that one actually speaks the same language and through art and culture, I think through artists, through music, like you said, that transition, that connection can be made, I think is so important to actually reach the audience that you're intending to reach.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly pertinent when you are a foreign government in another country.
Sure.
You know, even between the UK and the US, where we speak the shared language of English,
sure,
there is still so much that's different culturally, and it's those kind of arts and cultural programs that allow us to come closer together and get a shared understanding of our different cultures. And that's, you know, that becomes even more, like, increasingly more important when you've got you know, different first languages as well. So, you know, elsewhere in the world, but even in the US too.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting to, you're absolutely right. It's interesting how the approach has changed, and how we can by adjusting to that change, how can we be more engaging and more effective ultimately? I totally agree. What is something you think more Americans should know about the UK?
Wow, that's a very big question. So I think, so look, I've been here for less than a year.
Right.
I will be here for another 2 to 3 years. So actually, for me, it's helpful to think about it in terms of, in my time here,
Right.
what would I like to kind of, I guess, see change or different. And I think there's if I think about it like that, so I think, you know, one of the key messages is, I think, you know, for Americans more broadly to understand how much we as the UK value our relationship with the US, and particularly the relationship that we have with states. So I think sometimes people can kind of find it very, very strange sometimes that governments will have, like us, will have consulates across the US and not just an embassy in Washington.
Right.
So I think for me, it's also about this kind of understanding that we value our relationship with individual states, and we understand just how unique those individual states are, which is why we have these different consulates to try and understand that and to tap into these different languages, to use our kind of previous conversation, to work out where we can best work together. I think that also for me personally, I am passionate about diversity and inclusion, and I'm particularly passionate about spreading the message that the UK is a diverse, multicultural country. I am a product of that. I'm a very proud product of that. And so for me, I think it's also about people in the US learning more, understanding more about the UK, and how diverse it is, and how that is not just an end in itself, but how that can support businesses, increase our economies, foster these greater cultural links. So, for example, I took part in one of the biggest Diwali celebrations that happens in the US recently, and I come from the city in the UK that hosts the biggest celebration in the whole of the UK. So, sharing that, but also not just sharing it for the sake of sharing it, which is good in and of itself, but then using that to foster these links and shared language that we've talked about. So that, I think, is a really, really important to me personally.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It ties in perfectly to the last question that I have for today, and that is the fact that cultural education and global connections are so important. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Marshall Scholarship?
Yeah, of course. So the Marshall Scholarship is a program that we're particularly proud of as part of the UK-US relationship. So it provides a fully funded scholarship for US undergraduates for graduate study in the UK. It covers study in any subject area at any UK university. And what we're really looking for there is the best, the brightest, the most innovative, to kind of put their best foot forward and to apply for these scholarships when they're thinking about graduate study. And we are doing a fair amount of work to get this message out across Montana in particular. And actually, just over the last couple of weeks, I've been looking through applications and will be interviewing for next year's graduates. And we've actually had more applications from Montana than ever this year. Yeah, it's fantastic. And actually, and more than ever, we've had students looking at studying climate and the environment. So, all of our messages about youth being part of those solutions and fostering that through cultural education is absolutely ringing true through our Marshall Scholarship. So we would love to see more applicants from Montana in the future.
Is there a website, or how would somebody that listened to this podcast and just learned about the Marshall Scholarship, how could they find out more information? Is there information on your website? How would they go about it?
So there's a dedicated website, and it is marshallscholarships.org. We can certainly also send you that information too, so that you're able to link through from your website. We're absolutely happy to do that.
I would love that. Well, Tammy, thank you so much. 50 minutes later, it's always like that. You start the conversation, and while I'm always a little concerned if I have enough questions and how things are going, before I know it, it's usually 50 or 55 minutes later, and it brings me to the end of the podcast. I so enjoyed talking to you and learning more about the climate conference and also the UK's leadership role in it, which I think, as we said, is so important for so many reasons. But also your thoughts on how not only the government is important, but also how smaller communities and underrepresented communities can and should play a part in fighting climate change and making sure that the next generations have a planet that they can enjoy the same way we have. My November International Voices podcast guest was British Deputy Consul General of the British Consulate in San Francisco, Miss Tammy Sandhu. Thank you for listening. Those of you who are regularly tuning in to International Voices know, being of German descent, I usually end with a German farewell. Dankeschön fürs Zuhören. International Voices is brought to you by Global and Cultural Affairs of Arts Missoula and The Trail 1033. This and previous International Voices podcasts can be found at artsmissoula.org and thetrail1033.com. If your interests are in global and intercultural education, programming, cultural and global competence, and international affairs, we hope you join us in December for the last episode of 2021.